on the final report and recommendations of the commission for a uniform court system to order. I want to thank, looks like we got a really good crowd in the room here. We also have, looks like we have 4 or 5 other members Zooming in. It is a Friday. It's a busy time. And I want to thank the committee members and also our presenters for coming today. And on your agenda, we only have this one thing. And one, it's a busy time. We're getting ready for the legislative session. Also, it's an issue that we want to, zero in on and focus. So that's why I've allowed this to be just the only thing on our agenda. This won't be the only thing Judiciary A handles this session, but it is important. And if I may, before I turn it over to our presenters, Judges Stacey Bevel, Stacey O'Neill. Sorry, I may end up calling y'all Judge Stacey's or what and Judge Brad Touchstone, and want to thank former House member Touchstone for walking across the hall and coming here in the Senate to see where policy actually is done. So thank you for being here. But we did this, when I say we, the legislature requested this task force, and the committee members know that we've been doing a lot with looking at our children in our system. My colleague here has done a great job with the Women and Children Task Force, and there's a lot of overlapping that goes on. But, and I'm saying this for me, when I got this report and having launched off into this issue dating back to last year, and what I can say is that youth courts are more complex, more detailed, and really just more everything than I think people realized. And I'm saying this as a former youth court prosecutor from a number of years ago. And I think that sadly, the legislature has overlooked youth courts in our system. We just flat out have. And what that leads to is inefficiencies. It leads to funding shortages. It leads to staffing shortages. But it's also the flip side is when you do that, people do the things that they are like to do, and it may not be best from a statewide perspective. So I'm glad that we're shining a light and discussing this. I appreciate the judges for coming here to present because I think it's a really good step. And I've told them when I personally received the report, it came out and I was much more pleased simply because pleased than what I anticipated because it's of its thoroughness and the issues and the recommendations that y'all made. So it would be my hope that we look at this. And let me say this, I think part of the reason to the committee members for presenting this is that I don't think Judiciary A as a whole will do every single recommendation on here, but for the committee members, particularly you, Senator Boyd, you can see where we have overlaps of education, children, mental health, healthcare, and it may also spark individual bills that may get filed to address it. So I think those are extremely important, and I think we're on to a good start. But the fact of the matter is, I just think that the youth courts from a state perspective have been overlooked. And I think the governor, if you go back to last year, the Governor Reeves and his office has said the same thing. As they allude to in the report, the governor recommended appointment of chancellors looking at a specific to be youth court, what I call youth court chancellors. To me, that was a recognition by the governor's office that we've got issues. I don't need to go over the Olivia Y and everything that we're doing, that we deal with that. So I think this is a really good start, and I'm anxious to hear from our judges. And just one more housekeeping thing. What you have before you, committee members, is you obviously have the report. And then what we did was we asked from our agency heads, agency partners to send in their ideas on this. I want to thank them for doing it. So you have the letters of their thoughts on this. And y'all, judges, y'all may not have seen that, but believe me, I'm going to give it to you to see what you think. So, so that's what to the members, that's what you have before you. So with that, I know we have a presentation. We'll do the presentation and then it's have discussion and go forward from there. So I'm going to turn it over to our judges, and it's your floor. Thank you very much.
Am I good? Okay. Thank you for this opportunity. We appreciate. We want to thank you for and the legislature as a whole.
Judge, can y'all, because not everybody knows y'all, can you introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Stacy Bevel. I am the Lee County Court judge that handles the youth court in Lee County.
Stacy O'Neill, County Court in Madison County.
All right, Brad touched on, I'm circuit judge in the 15th Judicial District, and I'm a former county and youth court judge.
Thank you.
I'd like to point out before we start that this is our family out here. These are the youth court people. If you want to know anything about our system, I believe we're here. We've showed up. And so,
which goes to the point I was making earlier. I do not think that the average person understands how many state agencies, how many government entities are involved in our youth court systems. And so I think this is a perfect example.
Youth court touches everything because children touch everything. And that's basically why we do what we're doing. I want to, like I said, thank you for allowing us the opportunity to serve on this commission. We are 3 judges here, but there was a 20+ people commission that covered everything from a lot of people, agency people. We had law enforcement, really lots of different from walks of life that touch our system. So we had a really good group of people that were able to give us a lot of perspective. I just want to jump off into our presentation and invite you to ask questions if you would like. I just want to start, and a lot of you may know this, but it never hurts just to have a little review of our system in general. The current youth court system has 24 county court youth courts. We have 2 chancery courts that are hearing youth court cases, 2 chancellors, and then we have 56 part-time referee courts. The map that you have in your presentation breaks that down. Of course, the red is the county courts, the yellow being referee, and the 2 chancery being the blue. Just so you know, that the county courts are established once a county population reaches 50,000, or we do have counties that actually came to the legislature and requested, even though they don't have the population, they have requested those counties. So we do have a few of those. So you ask to your point, what all do we do in youth court? And we just gave some examples. So delinquency, I deal with, this is just an example of some things that I may hear before me. I have all the misdemeanors. We have lots of felonies. It's basically all crimes less than life and death sentence are committed with a deadly weapon. So I am on the 2nd floor of my courthouse, and they call me the little circuit. And so we may be hearing a lot of the same type of issues. Protection cases, as you know, well, let me back up. On delinquency, our partners are the Department of Youth Services that we deal with and help us there. We have protection, which is CPS, and they are also represented here today. We handle physical abuse cases, sexual abuse cases, emotional abuse cases, educational neglect. That is a large thing that I think is also going to be talked about in the session here. A lot of truancy issues.
I'm sorry, when you say educational neglect, what do you mean?
That means that children are not educated. Their parents have neglected them. Educational neglect can be, I think probably most of the times it's used as younger children that they can't get themselves to school. So the parent is the person that can do versus you have a teenager that a lot of times we pursue with truancy are 12 or, a little older that are more in control of themselves. But we do deal with a lot of educational neglect. And I think that's, as we'll talk about, one of the, we're lacking in the truancy being able to handle all of those cases. If you go back to that other slide 1 second, we also do child in need of supervision. That is where our truancy also comes under, and then we have the truant children, dependent children, child in need of special care. So there's lots of different avenues that you can come to. Do I mind to ask the people that are here, do you have a youth court background? Because I don't want to speak to things if you know.
Well, sure, I think.
Would you
it'd be- so
mind?
Let me do this. Let me go just down the list of the committee members. Senator Barrett, what do y'all have?
Yes, I currently serve as the youth court public defender in Covington County, which is a referee-based system, as well as I've done it in Lincoln County and Lawrence County. I practice a lot in youth courts around South Mississippi.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
In mine, Jackson County, we have a full-time youth court that's been there a long time, and the judge is elected. So it's a full-time, what I call self-contained court, which is also similar to Harrison County, which I practice as well.
I have a county court judge and then a referee in the other county that I have. So I've kind of got a split of both, and I feel like you have given me a strong education in this issue.
Sorry. Your education didn't start this year. We've
Yeah,
been doing that for a while, haven't we?
The majority of my district has part-time referee courts. The portion of Madison County I have is on its own youth court. But other than representing families in youth court over the years, that's about my only.
Well, I've got an educated
Interaction.
audience. I think if we know our audience, I can kind of move a little
Well,
different.
I don't want to neglect our committee members who are online. So if they would like to, I don't see it. If they would like to chime in, they could do that. Senator. Senator Hobson, can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear me?
What do you have?
We've got a youth court in Warren County, and I occasionally, very limited amount, occasionally get in a youth court, so I'm somewhat familiar with youth court practice.
I had a good conversation with him this week. He came to Lee County.
Senator Turner Ford.
Good morning. I have my home county has a referee court, and then there are 2 county courts in the district.
Who do we? Senator Thompson. I can tell you, he's in Harrison County, so I'll speak for him.
Is this on? Can you hear me now?
Yeah, you have to push the button. Thank you.
Thank you. We have youth court in Harrison County. I don't practice in there very much, so I'm not very familiar with it. I think Senator Wiggins and I actually referred a case to him earlier this week. Harrison County Youth Court case.
Okay. Thank you for that information.
That's your audience.
Thank you very much. Never hurts to know who
Senator
we're talking
England?
to,
Senator England?
who was on the commission.
Right, he was on the commission. Okay.
Yeah,
Thank-
yeah. Hey, sorry, guys. Yeah, I couldn't figure out where my mute button was here. Yeah, Bryce has already covered us from Jackson County, but I did serve on the commission, and I want to commend the judges and everybody that was on the commission for doing such a great job. It was an honor to serve with everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's your audience.
Thank y'all. So the next slide, these numbers represent the referrals, which means in a delinquency case, it is every case that CPS brought. It's the hotline calls. That is what we are looking at, that those calls are turned into referrals that are put into the My Kids system, and we deal with every one of them. So when you see that number, a judge had to, oh, sorry, I got ahead of myself. But those numbers you can see, and you can see also on the right how that looks like broken down to what county courts deal with in that number and the referee courts.
So one thing that we wanted to stress is the whole intake part of the process, because that is the part of the process. Having been a former public defender and then represented parents, represented children, until I became a judge, I didn't know anything about this part of the process. So when law enforcement calls in a case, when CPS calls in a case from the hotline, that's what a referral is. The 64,000 plus, that's how many referrals we had in 1 year that came into the youth courts of Mississippi. 64,000, I mean that, and I can tell you that there are a lot of referrals that probably did not make their way into this count. And there are different reasons for that. But each one of those referrals has to be reviewed by a judge, the youth court judge. So unlike in circuit court, where they only hear the cases that make it through past indictment, we hear the case, we have to review it. Now, I'm not saying we spend a lot of time on each one, but it takes an order saying either take no action or go forward or monitor this case or divert this case. But the judge has to be a part of that process. But not only is the judge part of the intake, so think grand jury part of the process, but they also have to be over the trial. And then after the trial, they're over the probation or permanency part of the process. So you've got grand jury, trial, MDOC in the adult world, but in the youth court world, we do it all, which means we have to manage counselors, we have to manage investigators at times as far as that intake part of the whole process. And this is the part that I think most people don't know, because unless you're living in this world, you don't see the whole picture. So when we talk about intake or probation permanency, that doesn't mean that we don't have agency partners that are a part of that. But those folks are doing some work, and then ultimately the judge has to manage all of that. This is just a comparison between the youth court system and the adult criminal system. And the 18,000 cases in 2023, because most of the delinquency referrals actually get prosecuted or handled, unlike the abuse neglect side of what we do. But the youth courts handled 18,000 plus cases in 1 year. The circuit courts that same year handled 19,000. Obviously, circuit cases have, we're dealing with misdemeanors in our youth court docket, but nevertheless, it still requires the same amount of supervision. Bryce?
Just for those that don't know, delinquency is the criminal cases in youth court.
Yeah, youth court has a nicer word for everything. We don't have trials, we have adjudications, we don't have sentencing, we have dispositions, but it's the same process. And okay.
As everyone that read our report, regardless what happens in this session for a structural change, we are in need of more funding for our courts. And we hope that the report highlighted that. And we've just taken liberty in some of these slides to show you how we kind of line up with the rest of the judicial world. And as you see, we get $2.5 million from the legislature for our youth court support funds. Our counties provide the rest. And MDOC.
Big budget.
347 million the same year. Circuit court, 8 million. And then that includes their support funds also. So we're doing a lion's share of the work, and we need some help financially.
All right. On the delinquency side of things, an outcry from our youth court judges is the lack of detention centers. The way detention centers work, each county makes a choice to build their own detention center. We have 17 detention centers in Mississippi. There is the state Oakley Youth Development Center that is only for commitment of felonies. Of the 18,000, I think in that year, maybe, I don't remember the number, but it's, I'll say 125, 150 kids maybe come through Oakley. The rest of the kids who are detained for any kind of jail time, it has to be in a detention center. And the county that owns it chooses whether or not they let out-of-county kids come. I'm in Madison County. I don't have a detention center, so I rely on the goodness and the hospitality of my neighboring counties who will allow that. And of course, it costs, and that's okay. But the range of what a detention overnight in a detention center cost is anywhere from $125 a night to $350 a night. So it's costly. And availability is an issue, because there are times when I get a call from law enforcement, I've got a domestic violence situation, I don't have a bed. That's my first question. Do I have a bed?
We did a lot of surveying the current youth court system when we did this, this report. And over 50% of the judges responded to a survey and stated that they had a child they felt was a danger to either themselves or others, and they had to let them go because there was no bed. These are people that are committing serious crimes. We didn't ask about the misdemeanor, all of that. These are people that they had a hard time sleeping that night because they didn't have a place to put them. I do want to say, if you're not familiar with detention centers, I am in Lee County. I have one. Don't think that these places represent hundreds and hundreds of beds. For example, my neighbor, I can hold 25 children in Lee County. And to be honest, I'm taking up those spots pretty much myself. We try to help where we can, but like Alcorn, I believe they can hold 5, 6 children. These are not large numbers of beds, even though we have these detention centers. For the ones of you that deal in youth court, you know what you're looking at. This is just to point out, we in youth court, we work in hours and days. We do not work in months. We do not work in years, which is a lot different than, let's say, circuit and chancery courts do. So I'm not going to go over all these, but you can see that we have really tight deadlines, and we have some counties that need more court time. And to get more court time takes people. It's not just a judge. So just wanted to point that out.
All right, the purpose of this map, this is one of the maps, and I don't know if it's the most recent, but it was when we made the PowerPoint. The children who are in CPS custody because of abuse or neglect. And it's pretty much broken down into 60-40 as far as kids that are in county court versus referee courts. But one point that we want to stress is that you cannot assume that a referee court has fewer kids in custody than a county court. And just to pull out some of the examples, Alcorn County, who is a referee court, has 80 children in CPS custody, while Hancock County on the coast has 81 children in custody. So different size county, same amount of children in custody. And other examples, Prentiss County, a referee has 97 children in custody. Pearl River County, county court, has 97 children in custody. And so there are, just because a county is small doesn't mean that the need is small. And I think sometimes our referee courts are treated like they're part-time judges, so they have a part-time caseload, and that's just not the case.
And that also tracks for the delinquency also. We have counties that have more extreme drug use, but they're smaller populations. So we have a lot of, and just violence in general.
All right.
The next set of slides, this is just an illustration that what does it take to have youth court? I've had people tell me, well, you're a full-time judge. You can have court every day. That would be great. Even myself in Lee County, I am having a very hard time finding full-time attorneys that want to take a full-time position because they want to keep their offices open. The state is suffering from an influx of attorneys, I think, that are willing to do this work. So this report, as you've read it, does not just focus on the judicial officer. I have to have all of these people to have court. I have a room full of people. And you see that a lot of those people have to be paid to be there. And that's the same thing. We put dollar signs on the people that the county has to pay for. And as you will see, the vast majority of them are county pays for those. Next slide. This is the delinquency side. It takes far less people to have a delinquency hearing, but at the same time, I'm not sitting there by myself either. As I said, we did a lot of one-on-one talking to a lot of judges. One thing that was wonderful about this report is I think it was one of the first times that we truly had cooperation, and we had the information from almost all youth courts. We got their budgets. They filled out surveys. Who's working for you? What are they doing? This was probably one of the most alarming things we found. And I will tell you, Lee County is surrounded by referees. Up in my part of the world, I'm an anomaly. Allison Kaiser's and Lowndes, we are kind of the only people that have county courts. So our counterparts are referees, and we know how they struggle because I came from a referee court before I became a judge, and there was no staff. The judges' secretaries are running things. The chancery clerks doing their very best to get all the stuff done. But these are people that are not dedicated to just youth court work. One thing I do want to point out, well, I'm going to skip that. I'll bring that up at another time. You may go ahead.
I guess that we want you to remember this, that youth courts require more staff in the courtroom and in the court system than any other court system, yet they're the least funded. The total money that comes from the legislature directly to the youth court is $2.5 million in the form of support funds. I'll get to the agencies in a second, but that's the money that comes to the court system, and that is split between the 82 counties, where the county courts, who are the larger populated areas, are getting 68,000. The referees are getting 15,000 apiece. And that kind of divides population-wise, but when a county's getting $15,000, that's not enough to hire a person to handle those 64,000 intakes that are coming in, because not only do they have to put them in a system, but the law requires that there be this intake unit that reviews it to then make a recommendation to the judge as to what should happen. So think grand jury in your mind, sort of. Well, yeah, and there are a few counties that don't even bother to draw it down because it's not worth it.
Not worth $15,000.
So
yeah.
Wait, say that again. I'm sorry. There's counties that don't draw down the money.
Yeah, just anecdotally, anecdotally, some of the counties do not draw these funds down due to the for lack of a better word, the paperwork that's required. It's pretty intensive on the fiscal officers of the county, the courts, to submit the paperwork that's required to draw these funds down. So absolutely going back to some of these smaller counties who, barely have enough folks to run the county's business. They simply don't have the time. The judges don't have the time to draw down even what y'all put out there due to the paperwork.
And where is that money drawn down from? Which state agency? Or-
AOC.
AOC.
Okay.
It's not a lot. There maybe 3 or 4 counties didn't pull down their money, or maybe a few more than that. But it is, I think $15,000 doesn't really get you a lot. It certainly doesn't get you an employee that's going to put in time that's needed. And we do want to acknowledge that the legislature gives a lot of money to a lot of agencies, and those agencies are witnesses in our courtrooms, and they take care of children outside of our courtrooms. So we don't want to say that the legislature is not doing stuff that helps youth court, but as far as the youth court system itself, that's what we're dealing with. We did collect a lot of data, all the budgets that we could get. The average youth court budget is $630,000
In a county
in a
court.
county court, and the referees averaged about 132. Of course, there's a wide variety because you've got smaller counties and larger counties. And the youth courts are primarily a county-run system, and so you've got a lot of difference in how much money is going into each one.
We're kind of now on the next slide going to get into our recommendations to start with. We had a lot of different opinions, and I will say we all grew in the process because a lot of people heard from a lot of different perspectives. And there was people that had their minds changed. There were people that got to hear from that really, Stacy had not really dealt with referee courts. She got to hear actually what they did on a day-to-day basis and what that looked like. And there were other people like that. So just to get into the first thing we wanted to recommend is that we believe that every family that is served in our court should have access to a full-time elected judge. That was a non-negotiable. We had a day-long meeting and we talked about those non-negotiables. There's a lot of stuff that is negotiable, but that was one of the main things we felt like. Now, we don't really know what that's going to look like in the future if that happens, but we did agree to that. That judge has lots of different things to do, intake responsibilities, to be on call for shelter and detention hearings, the volume. I do want to speak to this. Caseload volume demands full attention. We have these small counties that do not have a lot of staff, but we also, on this report, we were able, Peer did a, I'm sorry, I need to get that back. Peer did a report for us because a lot of people were saying, you don't really need a full-time judge. There's not enough work for a full-time judge. We heard that time and time and time again. So what we did is we asked them to study Lafayette County and Oktibbeha County. Those counties, just this election cycle came over and they transitioned from a referee court to a county court. They went through the money. They went through what they were able to get done. And reading this from a judge's perspective, I believe what that said loud and clear is we're not hiring new judges to do the work that's being done now. We're hiring them to do the work that needs to be done. These referees in these county courts are trying the best they can. This commission in no way is trying to say that a referee court is not doing their work. That is not it. These people are trying to do the work, but they don't have the resources to do it. So I think that's, if you're going to read one thing in that data packet, please look at that. I thought that was really interesting. To finish that list, one thing people don't see about think about is you need a full-time person to have community groups. I get tons of support from the community. I am the face of my youth court, like it or not. And I go out in the community and we speak and we put faces to these families and we try to help them get resources that maybe our counties can't afford or the state is not able to give either. As you saw, our timelines, they're rigid, very rigid. So they need that access to that full-time judge. The next slide gets off into the proposed court system structures. I will tell you that we learned early on that this commission would never come to a consensus to be able to tell you that we think this is the one you should choose. And there's a lot of people in this room that were on that commission. There was lots of discussion. It wasn't for the lack of discussion, but I think it was really important. We took a vote and these are the ones, and we looked at other ones that are not even on this list. And we decided that we just wanted to highlight these three. We wanted to give you the pros and cons. And then you were welcome when you got off the commission to go and advocate for whichever one you want. But as the commission, these were the three that we did, and we're just going to touch on those. I'm going to take the first one, which is the county court district plan. This has been brought before the legislature several times. We have Judge Hudson here who has championed that cause for years. And basically this county court plan would leave the 24 county courts intact and create county court districts with each containing 2 to 3 counties from the remaining counties. There would be a judge elected to serve in that district. There could be shared cost burden between the county and between the counties for that district. And this basically, when we talked about it, was just, we looked at several different bills that have been brought out over the years for that plan.
I'm not going to read that to you, but we sat around on 2 full-day workday sessions and just brainstormed about advantages and disadvantages from a lot of different points of view. And so we pulled these out of the report. They're in the report. They're maybe more detailed in the report, but we just pulled them out on each plan to talk about that.
Sorry. The Chancery Court plan, this was, you spoke of what the governor, nobody really talked about this until that came out in the executive budget recommendation.
Well,
And
then the governor accomplished his goal, I
he
would
did.
say.
There was a lot of conversation. And actually that was thrown into our commission about midway, I would think. It wasn't something we started talking about. But as you see, kind of what we envision that to look like is it removed the youth court jurisdiction from county courts, creates a youth court division in each of the 20 Chancery Court districts. The cost burden with youth court shifts to the state with judges, and some or all of the staff that we have. For example, I have 11 staff. Those all would have to be decided. Is that going to be a county cost, or is that going to be continue to be state, or if it's going to be moved to state? And as I said, that was introduced in the governor's budget recommendation for fiscal year 25. One thing I do want to say that when that came out, there was an estimation, and I think a lot of people who read it thought in money wise, wow, this sounds good. We're going to go to I think there's 20, how many Chancery districts, 20 some odd. We're going to put a youth court judge in every one of those. I come from the first judicial district that has, what, 9, 10 counties. We would need a minimum of 3, maybe 4 chancellors. I am a full-time judge. We have counties in the north that are pulling kids in custody numbers closer to mine. And so we would have to have, so it's not just one judge per district.
I'm going to skip to the hybrid one. So the hybrid plan really sort of takes the best of both worlds and tries to take the advantages of both by leaving the county courts intact, and then the remaining counties they fall into the Chancery Court now. But the chancellors delegate their authority to a referee. So basically what the hybrid plan would do would remove their ability to do that and add a chancellor to those districts that need another youth court judge. It would be a shared burden between the counties and the state because the counties would continue to support their county courts. How that burden is shared and shifted is obviously up to somebody besides the commission. But on all three plans, you're really looking at the same number of judges, whether you call them chancellors or you call them county court judges or you call them something else, because caseload really determines the need. And so the county court plan is about 44 judges. The chancery plan, I personally think is between 40 and 44 judges, although, and then the hybrid plan would do the same thing. And then our last slide.
So if the structure is not changed, we want to take this opportunity to talk to you about how you can help us.
Before y'all
Yeah.
move on to that, Senator Barrett had a question. I think he asked to leave early, but we wanted to get to this.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I guess just in general, y'all are going through plans and again, Senator Wiggins is right. I do have to leave and I'm going to transfer from live to the Zoom. But just receiving the report do y'all make any kind of recommendation on a plan for truancy moving forward? I know it certainly seems like in all of the youth courts that I practice in, the ultimate issue is a service of process issue. And, you know, once you get one of 3 or 4 guardians or parents, or maybe more than that in the court, and you have a truancy hearing, and whatever happens in that hearing, if they're truant again, then you have to go back through the whole process of getting service again, and by then school's out. So it just seems like, you know, I didn't know if y'all had made a plan, and it may be in here, and if it is, I apologize. And I didn't know if that was working with the Department of Education more. But truancy certainly seems like an area that of concern, especially with a lot of statistics coming out about, you know, children that don't graduate from school or early learning. So again, if I'm premature on the question, I apologize. I do have to leave. So I just wanted to see if that was broken down in here anywhere.
I will tell you, it is not addressed, but I'm going to take a little point of privilege and step out of the commission and just talk to you as a judge who does a lot of truancy. My judge that works with me, is Judge Stephen Spencer. And I will tell you that I've talked to Lieutenant Governor a lot about this. We've had a couple of conversations, and we have the referee counties, they can't support that volume. You know what kind of volume we're talking about. And we have used some things to do some programs where we bring them in pre-petition. I've shared some of that information. There's a lot of things that we can do to intervene because truancy is the gateway to my court. I believe that with all of my heart. That if we can help these families that are struggling with education, because it's not, if you sit, all of us have sat and listened to these families. You got a mother that's going to work at 6 o'clock in the morning and their child misses the bus. I mean, there's a lot of things just besides, well, you just need to make him go to school. Y'all know that, being in the youth court. So I'm excited about that. Would love to have an opportunity to talk about that. Truancy is my heart on that bench, because I think that if we really stood there and put a lot of effort into that, then DYS and CPS could be relieved of some of the burden that they have, because we would be dealing directly with those families before they get there.
Yeah.
Let me add, I think truancy is probably the most neglected area of youth court jurisdiction for several reasons. One, we don't have enough school attendance officers. it's hard for them to keep those jobs because the pay is so small. They kind of don't belong in anybody's world. They're not really part of the court system. They're not really part of the schools, the local school systems, so they're detached. And then referees do not have time to handle the docket. We tackled it in Madison County in a partnership with my school system. And it took us a couple of years to try to figure it out and brought down the truancy by 20% from the previous year. But it took extra days of the month just for truancy cases. Our referees don't have time to do that. So it's an issue.
Yeah, thank you. And I guess would the commission's plan be whichever of the three models were chosen, that it would be does the commission think that it would be best served to have a uniform truancy plan, like let's say in youth court, you had a truancy court within the youth court?
We
This
didn't
judge
speak
could keep
about
his
truancy
finger.
at all.
I'm sorry?
We did not speak about
Okay, I
truancy
got
in
you.
that way,
Okay, thank you.
but we welcome the conversation outside of the
yeah.
commission
Thank you.
with different judges.
Senator Baird, I would add, it's my understanding that in your local area, your youth court judge has said that truancy is the first indicator of neglect, delinquency, and mental health. Would y'all agree with that?
100%,
It's the way to catch it before it's too late. In a lot of
especially
situations.
mental health.
Let me repeat that. Truancy is the first indicator of mental health and other issues that were going on.
But it's the indicator of delinquency, mental health, abuse.
Yeah, truancy is a symptom. It's a symptom. And when you are able to break it down and figure out what the disease is, then you can treat it.
Thank you.
Yeah, and let me put a plug. You mentioned the Lieutenant Governor. I will say this, that Lieutenant Governor Hoseman has made truancy, I guess, a fulcrum of his agenda this session. And I didn't know this. So we certainly will talk with him and his staff, but if, as judges, please continue to talk to them about that, because he's put that at the forefront. So I think I don't know what it's going to look like, but it's going to be there this session.
Yeah. Moving on to our last slide is, again, our minimum action points. We really, as you read the report, focused on if we don't get a structure change, if that doesn't happen here now, what do we need? What can you do for us to help us do our jobs well? These families don't deserve us to just do our jobs. They deserve us to do it well and have the supports. So the first thing is we are talking about is to increase the support funds. You heard that the legislature, that is a specific statute that is authorized, and it's $2.1 million is what it was funded. We are asking you to consider giving every county, regardless if they are a county court or a referee court, would like to start off saying like $75,000. Let's just take that amount. That could hire an intake person plus the benefits, and then able to have some money left over, maybe to increase the actual judicial officer's salary. We found that the referees, the pay range is crazy, what we saw. Some of them is just very little, while some are getting good salaries. So if we did look at that 75,000, we're looking at about $6 million is what we're looking about to increase that fund. And if you come away with anything here today, we all talk money. I know that's what the legislature talks to, but I implore you to think about that at the end of, while the session's going on and whatever happens, we would really like to talk more about that and how we can use that money.
We joke about, for the cost of a couple of fire trucks, you could double how much money the state spends on youth court.
Be sure you tell Commissioner Cheney that.
Okay. I
don't want anybody's bad
I'll
list.
repeat it, but you can tell him too.
It's okay. I
We'll see
like
what he
fire
says about
trucks.
that.
I like fire trucks. You could.
I'd also add, right now, the statute restricts what those funds can be used for in terms of reimbursement for the state. I think it would be beneficial, particularly if the amount is increased, to give counties a little more flexibility on what those funds could be used for reimbursement purposes, whether it be lawyers, the numerous lawyers that have to be utilized in youth court. Right now, it's really restricted for a couple of positions, and it might help if those funds could be used for other necessary staff in youth court.
We want to make sure that right now those funds are really tied to intake, and that is super important, and that is our priority. But after that, that would be nice to use some of that. Reimbursement of judicial officer salaries. Right now, basically AOC takes the filing fees that county court judges take in, and they turn around and give a percentage of that back. And Catherine, correct me if I'm wrong, a percentage of that back on the salaries. I think it's about 27%-ish. It's about that.
Filing fees,
It's
whatever.
the filing fees, but the county courts only get back whatever the county spends on the judicial officer. They get about 25% of that reimbursed to them, but nothing with the referees. So that's also being considered a way to help with funding, is consider making the referee salaries uniform. At the very minimum, why are they not paid the same as a justice court judge? That is in many places smaller, a part-time position. But I will tell you, most of them are not. State detention centers, we can't stress to you enough. Oh, sorry, did you? Okay. State detention centers, we cannot stress how big of a crisis this is for us. And it's a safety concern. It's not just who we want to be detained. This is a true safety concern that we deal with every day. And then probation and rehabilitation. We need help with our partners here, do need more funding for things like diversion, DYS. We need things to show kids what could be, not just what is, but let's show you a different path. And, a lot of DYS officers, they're great people and they're good counselors, but they just come in and in some counties, that's all they have is their tool. It's just a voice to talk to them and counsel these children. Every county needs access to those diversion. Life skills is huge. I have a teenager, a 16-year-old, and I think that our education system for general population should have more life skills, but our kids especially, they need to know those life skills, basic things. And then one thing is alternative education. I want to point out that our children, some of them cannot thrive in basic education, high schools. And all we're doing is continuing to tell them that they are not worthy of an education when we don't provide some different avenues. We all know children like that. But we should have GED programs for them and other types of probation programs.
I have a GED program with my youth court because if a kid, I think you referenced this, if they drop out of high school, the odds of them being incarcerated later in life is astronomically more, especially if they're in the justice system. So we have, as a state, we've not done anything really to help our kids on juvenile probation who are at risk get a GED. We did in my county, but it took federal grant funds to get that off the ground as a program. But we need that because when our kids drop out of school and they're committing crimes as juveniles, then you know what's going to happen. And we need to stop that. And as a state, we're not doing anything to stop that. We need to. So.
Brad, do you have anything to add? Okay. We're open for questions. One thing I do want to clarify is that we want everyone in the room to understand that we drew the short straw and end up being the officers of the commission. That's why we're sitting here. There was some news articles that claimed that we were the experts. We do not put ourselves out as the experts at all. We do live this world every day, but I want you to know that we are speaking on behalf of the commission here today.
Thank you. I have some questions and then I'll open it up to the committee. And I thank you for your to the point presentation. First question, so when at the detention centers, when there's not a bed, what happens to the children?
I send them home. And pray they don't kill someone or somebody doesn't kill them if it's a domestic violence situation.
But isn't that the same place they're coming from, basically?
Yeah.
I'm not criticizing, I'm saying.
Yeah, if
there's
I
no
don't,
other-
if I don't have a bed, a detention bed, then I say, I'm sorry, officer.
I mean, there are times where you may be fortunate enough to have another family member that can come in and take the child until things diffuse at home. But yeah, oftentimes they go right back to where the problem is.
Or it's burglary, or
Yeah.
it's some other charge that's, if it were an adult, you wouldn't blink an eye at locking them up.
That's not just a DYS problem. It's not a crime problem. CPS has that problem. I think CPS sometimes is lauded to be the agency that provides everything for the child. I was very blessed to get to go to Dallas to a convention with a convening with the heads of many departments here. We talked about it at a round table with health department, mental health, CPS, delinquency. We talked about how they all are going to have to help us carry that, whether it be that a child that needs mental health, Department of Mental Health needs to help us. CPS nor the court is a bed. You know, it's not a bed. We don't have those in our courtrooms or behind there that we can place children. We need places to put children. That's probably, it's talked about in the report, but I would say that is probably one of our largest issues too, is the lack of mental health opportunities, and also drug treatment facilities for juveniles.
Thank you. My next question is, and I know y'all probably haven't seen this, but want your expert opinion. DHS, which I thank them in their response to our letter, sent in a letter stating that that DYS specialists are serving in a dual role as intake officers. And it's now it's their position that that's a violation of state law. They were informed that apparently this was something that's been done, but as of July 1st, 2025, DYS social service specialists will no longer serve as youth court intake officers. What is going on? What do you know about that? Is that the case? I see you praying over there, I guess. What's going on? And does that make sense?
They're telling the truth. And to say that, I want to tell you, a lot of that is just organic. Okay, it's not that the county was trying to put the work off on the state, or the state was trying to take it away from the county. It is, they are dealing with the children that they work with. So an intake, what that would look like.
We did a survey. There are, of the ones who answered, there are 11 counties that are flat out using their DYS people as intake to put that information into the system.
But let me, because I want to explore this a little, but let me understand. First of all, the DYS are counselors. They've not been trained as intake officers. Am I right about that?
I don't know what training they get, but they're not, the intake officer by statute is someone who is appointed by the judge. And so.
And certainly DYS is not appointed by the judge.
No.
Okay.
So they should be appointed, the intake officer and the intake unit should be appointed by the judge to make a recommendation to the judge. And I think what some of the confusion is that the clerical work of putting the data in the system is called intake, but the looking at the information and making a recommendation is intake.
Well, okay. And I think that's an important distinction that has gotten lost. And just from personal experience and all, but intake is it's a person who assesses the child, and correct me if I'm wrong, assesses the child and meets with family, whatever, and then they make a recommendation to the judge / court staff of what should be done. But intake is either used or considered, I'm going to put a data entry. I mean, is that,
It starts with data entry and it ends with a recommendation.
so you have a data entry person making a recommendation who, in my understanding, and we've talked about in your report, goes into training for intake officers. The whole point is to have a qualified person doing the intake to recommend to the judge so that you can get them on the proper path. Am I accurate in saying that? And so what you're saying is it starts as data entry. And
That's
my
just
guess
one
is,
function of
my
it.
guess is DYS, that's not why they were sent there to do
No,
that. Is that-
44% of our courts do not distinguish between the intake officer who puts the data in and the person who makes a recommendation
And why is that?
because they don't have anybody else.
Is it a
It's lack of
staffing
people.
matter?
Yeah.
or-
I mean, there's no middleman. There's no person to do it.
And in a lot of these referee courts on the DYS cases, they are the only people dealing with DYS children.
Say that
So
again, I'm sorry.
I said that a lot of this DYS people in the referee courts, they are the only person, they may have a secretary, most of them don't. A lot of them are covering more than one county. So the judge is looking directly to them to meet with the clients and to have a meeting and then say, Judge, I think you should bring them to court. Well, you have to remember, that's the same people that I'm going to send them to try to make them better people. It's not their function, and it is.
Which, to your point, DHS in their letter says their dual role raises a conflict of interest and separation of power issues.
You wouldn't ask MDOC to be your grand jury.
No.
But I mean, that's kind of what we've done.
I know we're the ones with the microphone, but I don't want to misspeak and speak for DYS, but that is what it looks like from what our information we saw.
I don't want to get too far afield. Is DYS here? Do y'all want to have
I
a,
saw Bob.
oh, is Bob here? Bob, do you want to say anything on this issue? Sorry, it's your letter.
Yeah, I mean, it's like Judge O'Neill said, it's like the probation office doing the workup on a case to say, yeah, I think you should indict this, and then that's going to be the probationer. We are the probation service for all DYS, our youth services counselors. They are the probation service for all practical purposes for the delinquency side of the docket. We're there after the judge has made an adjudication and has, found this child to be delinquent and in need of some sort of sentence, so to speak, some sort of adjudication, either to detention or if there is an available, and there are very few available systems of diversion in any of our courts. And that is something we've been banging the drum for about 4 years, asking for money to have, we call them adolescent opportunity programs, but it's diversion programs, community-based programs that are an alternative for judges to either doing as Judge O'Neill says, if there's a place to lock them up, you lock them up, or otherwise you send them home. Those are not they should not be the only options. But back to the question you were asking, from a constitutional standpoint, I don't think we at DYS can be in the role of determining whether the child comes into the system at all, and then later being the probationer for that same child. That is, I think it's a constitutional issue. And I also think it's just not, it can't be fair to a child for the probationer to have made any part of the decision about whether the child is brought into the system in the first place. So that's what I pointed out in my letter.
What about the the points that were made about the starting out as data entry and DYS data entry.
Well, I don't think our youth services counselors look at themselves as data entry people. They are social workers, and they're there to give the judge the full benefit of their evaluation of the child and what types of treatment, if mental health treatment is a concern, or what type of program would be in the best interest. You know, we're always looking at what's in the best interest of the child. And so the youth services counselors are there to inform the judge's decision about what is in the best interest of the child in adjudicating what's the next step.
So how is it that they end up doing data entry as we've been talking about?
Well,
No.
you've heard that already. It's just a matter
There's
of,
nobody else there.
there's nobody else. I mean, a referee may have a youth services counselor who serves that referee and, you know, several others in different counties, and there's no other staff person. And I don't think the judges have time, especially not a part-time referee judge, to do the data entry. Somebody's got to do it, and it's fallen to the, you know, the DYS youth services counselors, just because there's not another body in the mix.
And generally speaking, would that role be staffed by county personnel or state personnel?
Well, the statutes say that the judge has to appoint them. So,
Appoint the intake officer.
yes, and that the Board of Supervisors of that county has to pay them. That's what the statute says.
But what about the data entry person?
Well, the
A
If there was
function
a
of the
separate-
intake.
intake officer is
Okay.
both. Judge appoints them.
We said we need to change that and call it the intake clerk. She's your secretary.
got you.
I mean, you know what
I
I
got
mean?
you.
The statute refers to officer lots of times, but it really needs to mean unit. I mean, whoever I tell as part of the intake unit, you need to put that in the computer. That could be a secretary, you know, but I have to have people that are qualified to make good decisions and give me recommendations.
I got you. You got the real expert, Bob?
Yeah, this is Tony Kerr. She's the director of our Division of Youth Services. And I just wanted to talk about the fact, you know, it's part of the same issue with so many counties that don't have a detention center. You know, they have to look to other counties. They have to look to what's available. The same is true with these referees. If they don't have anybody else, they look to who's in the courtroom. Is that a fair statement?
Would you like to say anything?
I think Mr. Anderson.
Okay. Okay. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. I think we'll be looking at that issue. All right, so do I have questions from the committee members? Okay, Senator Boyd.
I'm going to start back with your presentation. The first thing, I've just got a couple of questions, and I've seen this before, so therefore I've wondered a couple of times. Tell me about the two offshoots of the two chancery courts that operate under the current youth court system. How do those two chancery courts work?
Judge Giles chooses not to appoint referees in two of her counties.
And she hears them herself.
She just does it herself. And I think
Okay.
that's probably, it's her preference. She enjoys it. She likes youth court. I think her caseload on the chancery side maybe is light or lighter than some chancellors. And so she just does it all. And
Okay.
it may have to do with the fact that those two counties don't have the funds to pay for a referee. That may be part of it. You'd have to ask her. She has 4 counties in her district, and she appoints referees for 2 of them, and she presides in 2 of them. So it's just her choice.
Okay.
And I don't know if this is reflected in the report. I think it is. We have a few chancellors who step in once the case reaches a certain trajectory. For instance, Judge Sheldon in the 10th district at home, once a plan's changed to adoption, for instance, she'll kind of step in and take over. So we do have some that kind of let the referee take it until it reaches a certain point, and then they jump in.
And appointing a referee is not mandatory. It's a
Right.
choice.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, I just wondered how those operated. We do have actually a number of chancellors across the state that I've heard from that when
Do
it
that.
reaches a certain point, they will step in. Is that right?
Well, the referees cannot do a termination of parental rights. And so if the case has to go to TPR, in a referee court, then that's when it probably goes to the chancellor.
Okay. All right. I'm gonna stress, y'all will be interested to know, I had a sheriff call me yesterday or 2 days ago on the way down here, and he was expressing the huge need that they have for detention centers because having to send children home when they needed to be, that it's just a huge need across the state. Also talked with the commissioner last week. We need some pay assistance probably at Oakley because we've got waiting lists to go to Oakley. Is that correct,
That is
Commissioner?
correct. Director.
I was gonna grill you on this Tuesday, so just go ahead.
Well, two things about Oakley that we constantly face, you know, there's a lot of physical capacity at Oakley, but that's only part of the equation because the staffing at Oakley is a nightmare, I think is an understatement. We will hire a half dozen folks and then we'll lose 4 the next week. You know, we have ratios, number of staff to student that we have to maintain. We're under a consent decree with the Department of Justice. And so we can only admit so many at a time, and we wind up looking often at who we can parole in order to admit somebody who's more urgent. But if we have if we have a child who's only been at Oakley 2 or 3 months, we haven't really given that child a real opportunity to have a rehabilitation experience, and we don't want to parole them early. And so we're constantly fighting the admission, parole issue and the staffing. And we are actually appearing before the State Personnel Board next week to talk about the career ladder plan that we have adopted for the Division of Youth Services that will bring our staff at Oakley, we hope, on par at least with what the Mississippi Department of Corrections pays, and it's considerably more than what we pay. Until a year and a half or so ago, we were paying the youth services workers, the staff that dealt with the students the most, about $23,000 a year. And let me tell you, if you think dealing with adult inmates is an issue, dealing with delinquent teenagers is triply as difficult because they spit at you and they bite you and they throw things and they take things off your body and beat you with things like your flashlight, and they don't think one thing about it. And so this is why we're constantly trying to hire staff, but also if we can get the starting salary up around, is it 41? I think 41,000 would make an amazing difference. I'm hopeful about that. That we can bring more staff there. But that's the issue with Oakley, is having enough staff, keeping enough staff, and then being able to admit students and stay within our legal ratios.
Commissioner, will you keep this committee informed of the results of your meetings next week on this particular issue? Because I think this is one that this committee, I think that, I don't want to speak for the chairman, but you do want to know the results of that, especially with our pending court decree and all of that.
Absolutely.
So I think we would all like to know the results of that meeting, because I think it is very important that we make sure that we are in compliance with the courts and the court decree, but then also too, that we have a facility that you can appropriately staff.
Sure. Absolutely. And I will say this, we're using a lot of ARPA funds finishing up. There was a lot of neglect at Oakley at the physical plant, and we're on a good path toward fixing a lot of things at Oakley. Whether that will allow us to have more, actually admit more students, more youth, I'm not sure, but we're hopeful about that. So thank you.
Thank you. Two other quick comments too is the need for the drug treatment center statewide. We do have some opioid settlement money in the future that I think would be able to be used in this. So hopefully that's something that we can look at towards the future to get some good treatment options that can be for this. The other thing too is the Department of Mental Health has asked us in their budget issues is to make sure that each some of you have already heard this, that each crisis intervention team that they have also has a youth specialist component in that crisis intervention team. I would assume, since we have y'all here today, I would assume y'all would be supportive of that, to be able to use that as a tool to make sure there's somebody that had some youth specialist credentials.
That came out of, actually, when we went to Dallas and taught, that was one of the main things we decided that we could do this session. Because in the reality, what that looks like is that you get a domestic disturbance call and police get there and they realize it's mental health. And if that crisis response unit could come out there and help diffuse that situation, you know who don't get called? Me, our CPS. And so I'm not stuck with the decision that I have to give, especially if you don't have a detention center, CPS is really used. But the more we can develop and put into those on the ground interventions for mental health with children, and also hopefully getting some more crisis beds. I know that they've put out some RFPs for them. I hope some people take us up on those, because that is amazing too, to have that opportunity.
Okay. And then I would assume too, you would encourage us to help make sure our counties can fund some additional youth detention beds across the state too.
Yes.
Okay. All right. I'll stop with those. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Senator Boyd. Any member online have a question they want to ask? If not, I have one last question. It's a little bit outside the scope of this, but I got a captive audience, so I've
Come on with it.
figured I would do that. It has been on multiple occasions by multiple people raised with me about looking at the disclosure of records statute. It has been, and I'm paraphrasing here, the source of much friction between different court systems. And it also seems to leads to bureaucracy and inefficiency. Y'all know what I'm talking about? So what's your thoughts on that? And I know, and I'm asking, you're speaking as members of the commission.
You want me to answer it as a member of the commission or as a judge?
Okay, well, both then. How about that?
We didn't talk about it in the commission. We didn't talk about it in the commission.
Okay.
We did not.
Then
but
as judges.
I will just say that there is a lot of feelings about that, but I do want people to understand that the law unequivocally makes me the guardian of those records. And it is not that I don't trust a fellow judge or anything like that, but those records have to be respected. What is in those records could change trajectory of children's lives if they got into the wrong hand, even unwillingly. And so I just think those kind of things, and I'm not speaking to like allowing the attorneys who represent the children to have records. That's not what I'm talking about. But we just have to safeguard those. And I don't mean to hold them real tight to my chest as something that is personal, but we are the ones that are the gatekeeper. And if they get out, that's me.
Are you speaking about court to court, or lawyers in the party, or the general public?
Yes, yes, and yes.
Okay.
Okay, wait a minute.
All right. Well, let me address all those. I think between a chancery action and a youth court action, that the information can flow between those with very in circuit. I mean, it's a
Well,
very,
I'll speak on that because this has been public on that. I mean, for the last, certainly 2 years ago, I think last year, we had to pass a bill
Yes.
at the request of a DA's office because the youth court was not getting the records to the DA's office to be able to prosecute a felon.
Correct.
And so they had to come and get an amendment passed to that law so that that could happen. I mean,
I'd like to speak to some of that, though,
Yeah,
is
and-
we
and-
have rules that tell them how to do that. Some people, regardless who they are, they just want you to hand it to them. There's a rule that says you have to issue a subpoena. I didn't make that rule up. It was
a rule within the
the youth
disclosure.
court, Uniform
Rule
Youth
6.
Court, Rule 5 and 6 deals with that in the Uniform Youth Court rules. I can't just hand them. There's a rule that tells you as another party how to get them.
But in a criminal prosecution, you don't have a judge involved yet on the
Right.
criminal side. But
I understand.
so
But that, just so, that's a anecdote to show
So-
what's going on.
okay, so then the second part of that is that I full-heartedly believe that a lawyer representing a party in a case has a right to see anything that's discoverable and anything that's pleading. And I think AOC has taken measures to let lawyers, they've created a portal for lawyers to be able to do that now if they're representing a party.
And my kids.
On the third part of that, youth court is confidential for a reason, whether you're dealing with an abused child or a child in a delinquency who's screwed up, done something bad, they deserve a right to have a second chance. And I think, like, in my courtroom, I allow observers to come in for educational purposes. In fact, this afternoon, I've got 3 folks coming in to observe my hearings. They will sign a confidentiality waiver. Their only purpose in being there is for educational purposes, and they've assured me of that. I let law students come in and observe, and I think who comes in a courtroom needs to be ultimately, the judge needs to be the gatekeeper of that, because people might want to get in a courtroom for different reasons, because what we deal with in youth court makes for good court TV. It makes for good gossip, and it makes for good Jackson jambalaya. And we don't need youth court because it's for the best, it's not in the best interest of children to have an audience when they're experiencing one of the worst days of their life or having to relive one of the worst days or years of their life. So I think the protection from the public needs to be kept. And I think whatever exceptions to that, ultimately it needs to come down to the judge's discretion to let outside people in.
My last comment on that, and I'm not saying, I don't disagree with what you're saying, but in the current statute, and not as a result of this legislature, anybody, there's already written exceptions to that into the statute. And so it's almost like, oh, I'm going to pick and choose. Maybe the legislature's done that previously. I'm going to pick and choose what we decide is going to be confidential and what's not confidential.
I will make one exception to what I just said. I believe that judicial performance in the official exercise of their duties should be allowed to see all youth court records and all youth court proceedings without exception. I think judicial performance in the performance of their official duties should be able to do that. And right now, they cannot do that without a judge's permission to get the records, I believe. But,
Those they're looking at.
or getting permission. So I think that needs to be added to the disclosure statute to spell it out that judicial performance has access to youth court records in the performance of their official duties.
When you say judicial performance, you mean the commission or judicial officers?
Judicial, like
The commission.
the Commission on Judicial Performance. They are the only entity that can discipline judges. And I think
Ah.
some of the motivation
got you.
behind wanting to get in the youth courts is to discipline judges. Well, the only people that can do that
What?
is judicial performance.
You lost me on that.
Well, I think there's this belief that some youth court judges are not doing what they're supposed to be doing. If that is the belief, the only remedy is for judicial performance to be able to do their job.
Now that I understand,
Okay.
and I'm glad we're having this conversation.
That's not a
It would-
commission thing. Well, we
No.
did talk about it.
It would be, it's not a far stretch to say that the confidentiality breeds that fear that the judges are not doing their job.
Sure. Because a
And-
lot of what we do is intake is a third of what we do, and there's nobody watching that.
Okay. Okay, well, we'll be talking about that some more, but thank you, because I do think that it's an issue that should be looked at, and I appreciate the perspective that you have on that.
I want to add one thing, and I think it's the only really partner we didn't hear from in the room, that OSPD is here. You heard from them. And we have had laws passed recently that gives everybody the right to have an attorney, the custodial parent, and of course, always the child. We need to ensure that happens. If you have a court where you're introducing that, it changes. We also, another thing is.
How is that going?
A lot of us, let's just say, a lot of us have been doing that for years, and their county pays for it. There's some counties that we either need the funds to come to the counties to pay for it, or come through them to pay for it. We've got to have attorneys in there. Another thing I do want to mention is that CPS was also given the right to be a party and to be represented. And I've been one of the pilot counties that received one of those attorneys. And it has been life-changing, to be honest, because youth court a lot of times is not considered a real court. You know, I mean, it's just the way it is. But everybody has an attorney now. So you know who lawyers talk to? Other lawyers. You know, we are running by motion practice.
That makes all
now.
the non-lawyers really happy, by the way.
Yes. Well, it's in youth court. If you do not have something like a motion practice going on, could send a kid, CPS might be ready to send a kid home right after the 90-day, you know, we say there might be 90 days between hearings. Well, that mama might have got a drug test and she might be ready to go home a week after that. And, you know, there's not a lawyer for CPS. So sometimes, and maybe for some reason the parent attorney is not filing it, you wait another 90 days before you make that move. And so when I talk about motion practice, I have the data from my county that shows the permanency turnover is amazing, because you're not waiting on hearings, you're waiting on progress from families. And
Well, that's going to make a difference.
yes, very
That
much so.
change y'all made last year, we're hopeful that's going to make a difference
Mhm.
statewide.
Well, great. Well, it's 11:30, so unless anybody has anything else. Yep.
You,
Uh-huh.
Bill.
Yeah.
I just want to thank all the judges, the commission, particularly Judge Touchstone, but these two ladies, they have been up here at the Capitol at 8 o'clock at night with us, working in legislation for the last few years in trying to make something that works for our youth in our state and to get kids to permanency quicker and to help families in this state. And we are all very appreciative of the collaboration that y'all have done with us to hopefully get some laws that are effective and can be implemented appropriately to help kids in the state. So thank y'all very, very much for your work and dedication.
One more thing before we close. I was blessed to be elected the chairman of the Youth Court Judges Council in September. We have kind of restructured. We have some really good people in some good places, and we welcome the opportunity to be available to the legislature to work on anything you have and to collaborate with you. So if you want or need something, or you're wondering about something, please reach out and we will get the right people for you to talk to.
Congratulations or condolences, whichever the case may be.
It's still out. I'm
But-
calling it a blessing
But
today.
we appreciate it. And yes, we definitely, that will help and work together. And I don't want to leave without thanking Ms. Pat for setting things up. Speaking of staff, so we couldn't do it without Ms. Pat and others around here. So thank you very much. So Is it on? Because I can't tell, but anyway. Oh, okay. Meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Oh, y'all did fine. Great.
You went well?
Now they know.